let's talk about a few points about the current situation in Iran. It seems, of course, there's no way to conduct independent, legitimate polling in Iran, given the extraordinarily a repressive regime that rules there. But there's probably good indications that most Iranians feel right now, ABK, anyone but Khamenei. They are completely exhausted of the utter mismanagement, the ineptitude, the incompetence of the Iranian regime under Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei. This is a country that is running out of electricity. Tehran may be running out of water. They have wasted tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars supporting terrorist activities throughout the Middle East, in Europe, in the United States, building up the former axis of resistance and training terrorists and militants in Gaza in the form of Hamas, in Lebanon in the form of Hezbollah, Iranian proxy militia in Iraq and in Syria, arming the Houthi militia that now controls the capital of Yemen, all at the expense of the well-being of the Iranian people. And so the Iranian people are yearning for some measure of, if not necessarily freedom, the way we consider it in the West, certainly anything but this utterly incompetent and inept government under the theocratic, ideological, radical regime of Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei. One of the reasons that, as you note in your question, that the protests may have diminished recently is because, if reports are to be believed, and I don't know how credible they are, but the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the paramilitary organization that supports the theocratic regime in Iran, may have executed 20 to 30,000 people in a matter of days, a level of slaughter that we haven't seen on the world stage, maybe, in decades, at least going back to the genocide in Rwanda in the 90s, or the Syrian regime when they slaughtered 50,000 people, Syrian citizens in Homs and other places in the world where we see this kind of ruthless slaughter. What's very sad, first of all, Danny, if I might, is the almost complete silence here in the United States and in European capitals that have been indignant and marching out in the streets, feigning concern and indignance over massacres, over deaths of innocents and of those who are guilty of invasions and attacks and assaults in other countries, especially in the Middle East, with everything that we saw in Gaza, and yet utter silence here against this murderous regime. But going back to your question now, what does the future hold? We knew that after Operation Midnight Hammer back in June, that the Iranian regime would try to rebuild its nuclear weapons program as quickly as possible. We see now both human and signal intelligence that Iran is not only trying to reconstitute its nuclear energy program, but it's also continuing to build out its ballistic missile arsenal. And these are what are most threatening to the Gulf Arab countries that are America's allies in the region, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates. One can talk about whether Qatar is an ally or an enemy or both. Kuwait, Iraq, Jordan, Israel, all of these countries, Oman, in the Middle East, and the degree to which an Iranian reconstituted nuclear weapon and ballistic missile program is a threat to the region. These missiles can potentially reach deep into South Asia, into Northeast Africa, into Southern and Eastern Europe, and also can threaten anywhere from 35 to 40,000 American troops that are based throughout the Middle East and in the Eastern Mediterranean, Africa, and in South Asia. So we're very much concerned about their ability to reconstitute their military threat against American and allied interests throughout the region. As you correctly note, there is now a massive armada that is being built up in the Arabian Sea, in the Persian Gulf, and in the Eastern Mediterranean, and a tremendous pressure campaign on the Iranian regime to end its nuclear weapons program. And it's still unclear, Danny, whether or not there's sort of a consensus in the administration here in Washington as to whether the focus should be simply on ending the nuclear weapons program or also persuading Iran to drop the development of its ballistic missile arsenal and to end the sponsorship of terrorism in the region and to end the sponsorship of Iranian militias and proxies in the Middle East so that it becomes a normal country with normal trade relations. We can lift sanctions. They can sell oil and natural gas, engage in commerce with their neighbors, no longer threaten their neighbors, and bring about the prosperity again of the Iranian people who enjoyed a wonderful quality of life, again, under a repressive regime with the Shah through the late 1970s, but they are now far poorer and far more repressed than anyone had ever promised them 45 years ago when the Iranian Revolution took place. Can Iran become a democracy? That's very difficult. It has no recent history of democracy. It's a very demographically mixed population. Only about half the country is actually Persian. The other half, maybe 40%, are Azeris, Kurds, Arabs, Balochs. So we don't know to what extent there would be an actual democratic transition, but at least a government that is no longer corrupt, that provides for the well-being of the Iranian people, and that can manage the infrastructure and, again, engage in normal diplomatic relations with all of its neighbors is the ideal short-term outcome, whether the people themselves overthrow the Khamenei regime or whether he dies and there's an opportunity for some type of normalized leadership that can bring about economic prosperity and some measure of political freedom, even if it's short of democracy, for a terribly repressed people for almost a half century.